Hi, everyone. My name is Bobby Johnson, and I'm a senior editor at Technology Review. And I'm also the lead on a project we're doing here called the Pandemic Technology Project, where we're looking at the development and deployment of exposure notification apps and other digital and data-driven interventions in the spread of COVID-19. So we've heard a lot about vaccine developments today, and there are obviously a lot of challenges around the rollout. So doing this at scale in an accurate, human, useful way is a real issue to tackle. Now, there's lots of things we know and lots of things we don't know, and we do know that there's ways we can make technology help this situation to get things working better, and that includes digital systems that already exist and new ones. So luckily, we have a group of folks here who can speak to those questions. They all have an inside view on the situation, how we balance people's concerns and public health needs and everything else that needs to happen in order for this to work effectively. So I know everyone's time is valuable and we're running a little over time. So I want to introduce the panel briefly and then get straight into the questions. So first up, we have Bill Patterson, who's an Executive Vice President and General Manager of CRM applications at Salesforce. We've got Ryan Oakes, who's the Managing Director of Accenture's public sector business in North America, and Adam Berry, who's the President and CEO of the PathTech Foundation, which is a nonprofit building apps for exposure notifications and more that are being used all around the world. So the first challenge I want to touch on is what we need to properly... Hi, everybody. Sorry, I don't know if we caught my introduction there. Was that on? Great, thank you. Zoom life, hey. Yeah, so the first challenge I want to touch on is that we need to properly administrate these programs, right? This vaccination rollout, we need to make sure the things we want to do actually work. So I wondered if, I'll go to each of you and just ask you for a quick rundown of what you and your organization are doing in that area and some of the things that you see. So I'm gonna start with Bill. Can you tell us what you're up to?
Yes, well, first off, thanks for having me. I hope everyone here is safe. I hope everyone here is healthy. And I hope everyone is a little bit optimistic, based on the horizon we're about ready to embark upon. As you mentioned, Bobby, I run the CRM applications here at Salesforce, and we've been focusing on how our technology can be used at scale, really to serve as the underpinnings for a lot of vaccine programs and coordination and potential outreach, in different local geographies, sovereignties around the world, really to use technology to become and use the Salesforce platform to become the gateway for how organizations need to digitize a lot of these rollout experiences. For many, a lot of the existing vaccine administration management systems are a little bit legacy. They haven't been built in an era of modern technology standards. And so at Salesforce, we're really using our technologies really to help modernize a lot of the local infrastructures around the world for that vaccine administration, coordination, scheduling, and even get to adverse reaction monitoring once the vaccine's fully applied. So we're quite busy and quite proud to be partnering with a lot of local geographies and governments around the world. And I think, for many of us, we know that technology can be a great answer to get ahead of this way.
Great. Ryan, do you want to tell us what you're doing and what Accenture's doing in this area as well?
Sure, happy to. And I'll start by just also thanking you for and thanking the MIT team for having me here today. As Bobby mentioned, I'm actually responsible for Accenture's public service business globally. So I have the privilege of looking across cities, counties, states, national governments around the world. And as I talk a little bit about what Accenture is doing, there are some similarities to what Bill was just describing, which is, I'll use two words to describe it: speed and scale. So if either one of them was the only thing, if it was really just about speed or if it was just about scale, those would be in and of themselves tremendous challenges. The fact that they're happening together, it's really about bringing a range of capabilities to our clients. And some of those are about just really dealing with everything from what does a citizen or a constituent see? What does a person see when they're trying to schedule an appointment, or they're trying to figure out where to go? Or what does a governor do when they're trying to figure out how to distribute the vaccine and how to respond to changing demand in different locations around their state? All the way to broader analytic insights that will allow a governor or a mayor or a county executive, or quite frankly, the leadership of a country, to make better decisions about the policies that they have in place to manage their area of responsibility. So we work really with a range of technology solutions and capabilities to enable that, with the key being doing it at speed. I was looking at the dashboard of countries and states that we are working with today. So this is not we're going to start deploying some of these capabilities in the coming weeks and months. This is, we went live with capabilities in multiple states this week. We're going live with capabilities in other states around provider enrollments and location enrollments in the coming weeks. And that is only ramping up. So this is the technologists on the call, this is not going to be a quiet holiday season while we try to get out in front of the scale that's really needed as we progress out of this first wave of distribution. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, obviously the challenge is huge, and I don't think there's been more urgency in anything, in at least in my lifetime. So Adam, I wanted to come to you and sort of also touch on what this means for end users, because we heard a little bit about, more on the back end side of providing. What are you seeing at PathCheck? What are you working on, and what are the challenges you see coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Well, it's really a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk, and just want to echo again, hope that everyone here on the call is staying safe. Since PathCheck's probably not as well known as Salesforce and Accenture yet, just by way of a little bit of background, PathCheck was spun out of MIT this March, and it's really an unusual and I think in many ways unprecedented organization. We have a community of more than 2,000 volunteers. They're almost all professionals from the software and healthcare industry around the world. And our mission has really been to help catalyze and develop a digital pandemic response by providing open source software, research and analysis, and standards that help to contain the pandemic, revitalize economies, but do that without sacrificing privacy. And our first focus was really in digital contact tracing and exposure notification. And we're now, as Ramesh spoke about this morning, really getting kind of focused on vaccination. But I think the interesting kind of relevance of some of the work that we did on exposure notification, and we're launching exposure notification apps in right now about 6 states and countries around the world, and of course there's many other teams that are launching other ones, is the way in which we were able as an industry, and this was driven by a lot of players and Google and Apple's participation, to design an approach to tracing that was deeply privacy preserving. And the Google Apple framework and the apps that have implemented it, I think, are demonstrating that you can offer a very large scale, potentially very broadly adopted mobile consumer internet service that is profoundly privacy preserving, like in a way that I think people have rarely come to expect from the kinds of consumer applications that they get now. And what we're hearing, and of course, EN is still fairly early, and I think vaccination is the introduction of vaccines is going to change the sort of trajectory for exposure notification. But what we've learned from that from consumers is that they really love it when they understand how well their privacy is being preserved. And so it motivates kind of instrumental goals like driving participation at the same time that it's addressing, I think, like fundamental moral and ethical goals, like just sort of our basic right to privacy. So as we're now looking at the problems associated with vaccination, and to the point that Ryan was making earlier, vaccination is moving extraordinarily fast and at an extraordinary scale. I think what we're trying to do, both through our research and our writing and also some of the software that we're developing to demonstrate what's possible, is to kind of provoke a little bit more robust discussion about the role of privacy in all of this. Does the federal government need to sort of vacuum up all of this personal health information from every citizen across the US? Or can we start to introduce strategies where we don't sacrifice speed and scale, but we still achieve some level of privacy and protection? And we don't think that's a technical problem. Like, the technology exists to do this well. It really is a sort of policy and implementation questions. Are we going to take that direction as we move forward with these technologies? Or are we going to sort of drive into a really centralized strategy? And what are the implications of that? I mean, again, at the end of the day, as I think someone earlier said, the first goal is let's stop transmission, right? Let's save lives. But these things are related really deeply. And I think that's kind of the sort of space where we want to sit, looking at that kind of applied innovation.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? It's there are so many things in tension with each other over the rollout and delivery of all of these things. And, plus a very confusing, as we've heard in previous sessions, very confusing and messy public discussion about lots of this with, frankly, a lot of bad actors who are, trying to confuse things for the end user and for the public. So I do want to touch on some of that, though, because I think there are many questions to be answered and to be discussed. But centralization and decentralization, and that kind of the way they plug or fight against each other, we're in a kind of different situation now than in most things, and we're building things that we're giving to users so fast. We've hardly even invented it before we've started giving it to people. And that results in a lot of confusion. It also results in us not knowing things sometimes, right? Centralization is about being able to give public health officials the data they need to make good decisions. Decentralization is about protecting the privacy of individuals. And those things, do they have to be in conflict? Are there ways to resolve it? Do we think better communication will help get over that? Maybe Bill, you can give us some insight.
Yeah, well, first off, I don't think they need to be in conflict. I also think that we also can't assume that every actor is a good actor in this process. And I think that we need to think about really using technology as a way of just being a gateway to give access to the right data to the right people at the right time, without necessarily thinking that it's central, it's decentralized, et cetera. I think for a lot of what we've been focusing in on, candidly, back to your point around speed, is really equipping those that have a distinct need to digitize their operations with the technology they need to facilitate those connections with those that are maybe inflicted with this virus. I think Salesforce now is in 38 of 50 states, powering contact tracing that was incredibly manual. It was more of an opt-in kind of experience because we had yet to see real public trust, set in around some of the more modern ways and potential ways that digital contact tracing could come in an automated fashion. So I think, it's not so much about centralization or decentralization, Bobby, to your question, but I think it's really about where can we use technology simply today, one, to try and standardize a little bit of this, quite chaotic world that we found ourselves in, where we just were behind the times in terms of how we could get access to this information. From here, I think it really goes into, I think there is a lot of opportunity for us to think about more of a standardized way of collecting data, especially in a pandemic, where one of the challenges we've had is we just don't have a national response to this virus like some other countries around the world have been able to enact. And I think that maybe is something that we have a lot of hope for what the future could be around, maybe getting to a degree of standardization, because I know, for Adam and for Ryan and probably myself, it's been probably more under the variety of experimentation and knowing what's possible. It hasn't exactly, gotten to a place of finding the one way that we need to get ahead of this situation that we're all in.
So Ryan, I wondered if maybe you could let us know some of the, in all of this, some of the roadblocks and bottlenecks that you see in the processes and how it relates to all the things that Bill just spoke about.
Sure, happy to. And, maybe I'll start by saying what maybe takes an hour to develop in terms of a screen or a visual that you can create for how a user might interact with a function, let's say scheduling or something like that. That one screen may take a week to integrate on the back end. And this is where there are really important considerations to be evaluated around privacy and standardization across entities. And certainly, I suspect all of us on this panel and most of us in the session would talk about the value or the desire for there to be some level of standardization and what is kind of normal from entity to entity. But the messy reality that we live in is that we operate in countries and geographies around the world with 30+ years of technology development that is complex, and there's real work to integrate. And so, to me, I look at it this way, which is, many of the states that Bill referred to are states where our two companies collaborate together, and a great partner of ours in Salesforce. One of the highest value things that we do right now is we get 10, 12, 15 of those states together, and we have conversations with them about the very topics of privacy and standardizing some of the functions and capabilities so that we actually can continue to move that journey forward in terms of both providing some of the rigor that we all expect in terms of putting control of data in the hands of the individual, while creating the kind of aggregated visibility that policymakers need to be able to make those types of decisions. So I'll pause there.
And I think if I could just ladder off of that, I think that the point that Ryan just made is an excellent one, which is, perhaps instead of seeing this as sort of stark trade-offs, is it centralized, is it decentralized, is it innovative, or is it legacy? I think it's really more a question of how are we addressing different stakeholder needs, right? So there's a set of stakeholder needs that are related to the individual users. So those of us who are being asked to provide our data in order to get access to the vaccine, there are needs that are public health needs, there's needs that the providers face, and there's needs that we face at a national level in terms of coordinating all this delivery. I think part of what it falls to us as technologists to think about is how can we address those different stakeholder needs in ways that are smart and thoughtful, where we leverage the technologies at our disposal in order to sort of address their needs at the same time that we protect their interests. So, coming back to your original question on centralization versus decentralization, decentralization and federation are a means of protecting data. It's a mechanism by which one can increase the security of data when it's applied correctly. And it's also a way in which one can provide privacy, but it's not the only one. We achieve privacy and data protection by layering strategies. And in some cases, those strategies actually result in systems that are vastly more simple, right? And so I think it's trying to introduce that thinking is one of the things that we're trying to kind of, as we kind of engage in this discussion. And we've also had a great chance to collaborate with teams at Salesforce and work with folks at Accenture and many other providers. So, I think we see this as very much like an industry collaboration to try to address these issues.
Yeah, I would build on that, Adam, just for a second, because I think part of this collaboration also means that organizations need to be way more transparent with how they store data, how they integrate data, how they process that data, and who has access to that data, kind of broadly speaking. We're learning a lot about maybe the ineffectiveness of some of the legacy systems designs. And here I am in the state of Florida today, a lot of the national news about just access to a public available emergency response system, where you can go online on Reddit and find access to the usernames, passwords to send out information through that kind of thing. that's not the kind of systems that we can trust at scale. And I think that, all of us, what I love about working with these group of individuals, and these gentlemen in their organizations, is we adhere to degrees of standards and practices that are best in class around putting privacy at the center, putting trust at the center of these experiences, and are world-class systems that have been built for making sure that nefarious access just does not occur. And so I do think these are the kinds of things that brick by brick and data by data and process by process, experience by experience. These are the only way that we're going to be able to go back and re-win public trust that's been quite handily lost in this moment in time.
Yeah, so we've only got a few minutes left, and I really wanted, there are obviously, we in our project at MIT Tech Review, we really are looking at the whole pipeline, from drug development through to administration and exposure notification and transmission suppression. There's a huge pipeline of places where things can be improved, things need to connect together. But one that's coming on the end of all of this that people are talking a lot about is, vaccine passports, digital immunity records, what comes after I get the vaccine and what am I going to be asked to do? So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on that area and understand how you are all thinking about that. So, there's obviously also a lot of confusion and fear among people that, not only are they going to be asked to take the vaccine, which they may be happy to do, but then what happens after that? Adam, you've probably learned a lot from your existing work in contact tracing and exposure notification that might throw forward into this. So what's your thought?
Yeah, so I think just as a starting place, one of the really amazing things or kind of cool things about the exposure notification applications is that we're able to do this very, very broad-based form of contact tracing without ever asking someone, what's your name? What's your birthday? What's your address? Anything like that. There's never that transmittal of that kind of data at the end user app point, which is pretty neat. Like I think there's something to learn from that as we think about how we engage end users in vaccination. I think when it comes to vaccination credentials and digital health passports, I would say that it's smart for us to sort of kind of decompose the problem between technology and policy. There's been incredible work done in the last several years by the Trust Over IP Foundation, the W3C, to really establish a set of standards for how we can do verifiable digital credentials. Like that technology, I think, is well understood, and there's a lot of amazing teams around the country that are developing that capability. So on that front, the capabilities are there. To Ryan's point, actually integrating those capabilities into the existing systems that providers and states use, that's a pretty sizable technical challenge. I think the harder problems are going to be faced around policy, right? So you do have a verifiable credential, whether it's printed out as a QR code on a piece of paper or whether it's on your phone. What does that mean? Does that mean you can or cannot get into a venue? Does that mean that you can or cannot get onto a plane? I think those policy questions are going to be way harder to solve than the technology problems that are associated with this. Like, we can create the technology, we can deliver the technology to do this, but we need to think really hard as a society, what does it mean if you're carrying around a vaccine credential? What does that do for us? And those problems are not technology problems, and they're quite difficult ones.
I think, Bobby, just want to build on that for a second with Adam. I think he's dead on around the policies and the rate and change in which policies are kind of coming in. And you also think about just the rate of change, because when you code software at times, you can kind of build to fit a specific known set of variables, and then something changes, and then the regression of that change also forces us to really think about needing to make sure that our systems are kind of built for that resilience and speed to that point. And so I think it's not only that we have to build systems that are policy aware, but also have to build systems that can take and incorporate change in a distributed way, in a connected way like never before. Because you imagine this pandemic we've been through First, it was a 10-day quarantine, then it was 14, now it's back to 7. I mean, these rate of change is really profound. And I think that, we're going to have to also be willing to build our systems where with a degree of loss of control, but a degree of openness to be able to send and receive data from these interconnected, experiences that allow us. And I think, Adam said this perfectly. It's more like all organizations, like a consortium, to have to work together in ways that maybe are unfamiliar, but are actually quite interesting to see how innovation is actually getting materialized today.
Yeah. We're out of time, so I'm gonna give Ryan the last word and then wrap up. So yeah, Ryan, any last thoughts on those topics?
Yes, that's a powerful weapon to hand over. Yeah, I pulled up. I had my schedule that happened to be sitting on my desk on my next screen over, and on my schedule yesterday, I had a meeting with an airline, with a retail company, and with a border agency on this exact topic. And that's just 3. That was yesterday. That is, as Adam has said appropriately and Bill echoed, it is the challenge of, it's not one challenge, it's a challenge of pages and pages of use cases and scenarios that need to be thought through from a policy and a practice and an operational perspective. And that's the work that I know we're actively participating in, as I'm sure many people on this call and certainly on the panel are, in trying to help beginning to pull through those as quickly as we can. Because of course, after we make sure everybody's healthy, we've got to get back to the business of economic activity and growth. And, it's important that we be working on both at the same time.
Yeah, certainly this, if we've learned anything, it's change, adaptation, juggling lots of things at the same time, trying to, these are all real problems with huge urgency. So I wanted to thank you all, to Bill, to Ryan, to Adam. Really appreciated your time and your insights, and good luck.
Thank you very much.